Good morning and welcome to City Watch. This is a watchdog program for social, economic, political, and cultural issues here in New York City. I'm Jeff Simmons, your solo host today, and I'd like to wish our listeners a happy and prosperous new year. When I think of a new year, I kind of reflect on the last year, and I also look ahead at what I hope to accomplish and what I want to see in the world around me. I often reflect on the fact that I'm a year older. I'm at the tail end of the baby boomers, the folks that were born between 1946 and 64. And with age, I do consider what was once easier and simpler for me that may be more challenging now as I get around the city, and what I will need as I get up in years. So with that in mind, today's show is going to focus on our aging population and how our city can meet the new needs that arise. We've got a great show for you today. First up in a few moments will be AARP New York State Director Beth Finkel, followed by BronxWorks Development Director Ken Small, and then a special guest Department for the Aging Acting Commissioner Caryn Resnick. She's filling in because we originally had New York City Council member Margaret Chin, who is under the weather today. We wish her a speedy recovery, but we are extremely happy to have Caryn Resnick on the show later this morning. Just like our country, New York City is getting older as the baby boomer generation retires in greater and greater numbers, and medical advances allow more adults to live longer. It is estimated that the number of Americans aged 65 and older is projected to reach nearly 70 million by 2030 across our country. And in a 2017 report, the Conference of Mayors had said that 9 in 10 persons 65 or older were living in metropolitan areas. So just look at New York City, for instance. From 2005 to 2015, the number of New Yorkers over 65 years in age rose by 19.2%. That was more than double the rate of the total population and more than triple the rate of the population under 65. So with that, I'd like to bring on our first guest, Beth Finkel. She has served as the director of the New York State office of AARP since 2012. And in this role, Ms. Finkel has led the development and delivery of the organization's community programs, advocacy, and information for its 2.6 million members, 50 and older. That's 50 and older across the state. Welcome to City Watch, Beth.
Hey, Jeff. Good to be here with you.
Good morning. So give us a sense of the landscape. How do New York City and state stand as livable regions for an aging population?
I really think you laid it out pretty clearly for everyone. This is makes me think of a tale of two cities, right? This is the best of times and the worst of times. Best of times because people are living longer, fastest growing population across the country is 85 plus percentage-wise. So those numbers keep climbing. And I know you mentioned the New York City number, but I think equally staggering is that in New York State, 35% of the population is 50 or older right now. And so we know, as you mentioned, baby boomer, I'm a baby boomer, those numbers are going to grow every single year as we go forward. And so it's the best of times because with medical breakthroughs, we're all living a heck of a lot longer, which is better than the alternative.
Of course it is.
Right? But it's the worst of times if you don't have the resources that you need to age with dignity in place.
So, given that scenario, how do we keep our city affordable and livable?
Well, I think there's a number of ways. First of all, obviously housing. When we survey our members, housing always comes up as the number one area that they're concerned about affordability. And in fact, we see that for all generations. But for older New Yorkers, it's a lot harder in two regards. Number one, they're probably on a stagnant income. Right, they don't have the opportunity to increase their income as once you hit a certain age, and you're living off of, if you're lucky enough to have had a pension, or your Social Security, or a combination, or 401k. And many people are working much longer because they want to, and some people because they have no other option. So there's a whole bunch of areas related to that. We can look at transportation. How do people have access to New York City subways? MTA's getting a lot of ridicule lately. And I think one of the things that really stands out for many of us is that 3 out of 4 subway stations lack elevators in New York. So it's, we think about all of those elevated subway stations and many others that are not. I mean, if you can't even get on a subway in New York, you're really stuck.
It's interesting. You just going back for 1 second, you mentioned about working longer. I had read a report by City Controller Scott Stringer that came out in 2017, and one statistic that was really interesting because I'm someone who never envisions retiring. I love working. It was that over a 10-year period, the number of working seniors in the city had grown by 62%. I mean, that's an amazing statistic. What are some of the challenges that arise as we have an older population that is continuing to work longer?
Well, I think age discrimination is one that we really have to talk about. We've recently testified about that for New York City in particular, and we've got some policy recommendations that really like to get out there in New York City to curb age discrimination in the workplace. Nearly 2 out of 3 workers aged 45 and older have seen or experienced age discrimination on the job. That's here in New York. That's a really high number. 2 out of 3 aged 45 and older. And we really need to address that because a number of reasons. Number one, the longer people work, the longer they can save for that longevity bonus years they're going to have. But also, as you were saying, many people don't see another way of aging except to continue working. Those who are fortunate enough will work because of what you were saying, the pleasure of working and keeping themselves occupied and productive. But there are huge percentages of people who have to work because they have no choice. Either they, as I said before, they don't have pensions or 401ks, Social Security, although there for folks, is not going to be able to pay for everything that they need as they age. And as a matter of fact, almost 50% of New Yorkers are dependent on Social Security for 90% of their retirement income. So the longer they can keep working and bring money in their households, the better off they will be.
So is funding on a city level keeping pace with those needs? I'm curious what advocates are looking for in the city budget this season.
I'm so glad you asked that question. It's interesting because, first of all, we 2 years ago, the mayor put $23 million more into senior services, which we were extremely pleased about. But DFTA's budget is still less than 1% of the New York City's budget. And as we talked about those demographic trends, that's just not going to hold up any longer. More money has to go into senior services. Across the board, home and community-based care, transportation services, Meals on Wheels services, the quality of those services, because we need to keep people at home for as long as possible. Once they have to go into institutional care, there are so many economic ramifications on that for both our society and for our government impact. So, for example, if someone has to go into institutional care, the largest payer of that institutional care, nursing homes, etc., is Medicaid. And over 80% of the beds are paid by Medicaid, which means that you pay, I pay, we all pay because it affects the budget. Second of all, if people are no longer in their homes, they are no longer paying property taxes, they're no longer taking their extra money and going down to the local grocery store, bodega, dry cleaner, pharmacy, you name it. And then you have that added impact of those extra dollars not going into small business communities, and then they can't pay their taxes or they can't pay their expenses. So, I'll just give you one more number in this because I think it's really staggering. The contribution of people living longer in New York State, of older adults, is $700 billion a year into our economy. I'm going to say that again because it is so staggering. It actually accounts for half of the state's GDP, $700 billion. So we need to keep people in their homes as long as possible, and we need to keep them here in New York City and here in New York State. They support 55% of New York's jobs. 51% of labor income, and this is the one that I know that state officials need to pay attention to, and they do. It supplies 47% of state and local taxes.
So you're mentioning the state level, and in 2017, New York became the first state in the country to join the age-friendly network. What does that mean, and what's the impact?
Age-friendly is a designation of the World Health Organization. It's part of the UN, and there are municipalities and counties and towns across the whole world that are designated age-friendly. And what that means is that those governments have made a commitment to help people live their best lives as they age. And age-friendly is not just about older adults, by the way. The parts of making a city or a town age-friendly makes it better for people of all ages. So better outdoor spaces, such as parks, which I think about New York City and New York State. We are really blessed with some wonderful open spaces and parks. Transportation is another area, and we talked a little bit about that with subway accessibility. We need to bring that up to speed. Housing that's affordable, social participation, so we want people to get out there and be social because isolation kills. Literally, we did a study recently, and if you're socially isolated, it's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Isn't that crazy?
Wow.
Yeah. Civic participation and employment, we talked a little bit about that. Communications and information. I mean, how do we get access to technology to older adults, which is really important. And then community support and health services, which we've also begun to talk about.
So I'm talking about an older population, but it's not a monolith. It's not one. I always get concerned when people say like the LGBT community, because there's a number, you're grouping it all in one. And I want to just make a point of saying that, AARP also had reported on the disparities, the racial and ethnic disparities among New Yorkers who are 50 and older. Can you talk a little about that and the different needs that arise?
Absolutely. So, we did a study recently that we partnered with the Urban League, the NAACP, the Hispanic Federation, and the Asian American Federation, and we realized that nobody was really looking across the multicultural markets at the 50-plus and what disparities were in place. New York State has the distinction, and I know we always say Excelsior, we want to be first, but this is a place we don't really want to be first. We are number one in the country in income disparity. The top 1% in New York State earns 45 times what the next 99% earn, put all together. Which is amazing, right? And what does that mean in a state and a city where multicultural populations are soaring? So that's one of the things that we really, it's over 50% of older New Yorkers in New York City are people of color. And across New York State, it's over 33% of the 50-plus are people of color. So when you look at the average income of people of color and then put it in the context of that earnings discrepancy or disparity, you can see how it's not an even playing field for people of color. And you can take that across so many different areas of affordable housing. People of color are much more likely to be paying a much higher percentage of their income for their homes, which in many cases puts them really underwater in their budgets to be able to continue that burden of the cost of housing in New York.
So a short while ago, you mentioned that the DFTA budget was less than 1% of the budget. So as we look ahead at a city level, but also a state, what are some of the legislative remedies that AARP New York is going to be advocating for this year?
So number one, in New York City, is to do that pretty quickly, which is absolutely more money into services. The fact that nearly 20% of the city's population is now over 65 There's just no way that with having that less than 1% of the city budget, we are prepared to fund the services that older adults need, and that, as I was saying before, literally fuels the economy of New York. So that's number one. The other area that we also mentioned was age discrimination. We'd really like to see some action taken there. And then I want to go back to age-friendly because you mentioned it. New York City was actually one of the first major cities in the world to be designated as an age-friendly city, and they made really some terrific inroads. However, the budget on that was reduced for this year. So it's hard to understand how we can be, in all honesty, an age-friendly city if the budget was cut by 2/3. So we need reinstatement of funding for age-friendly New York City. So that's the other piece that I really want to emphasize.
One of the other challenges that you're facing is the need for more family caregivers because those needs are growing. And I just want to cite a statistic that it was by 2050, the number of Americans 85 and older will more than triple, and as many as 34% of older adults could experience functional limitations and need full or part-time help to avoid or delay institutional care. Yet the availability of family members to provide unpaid care is going to decrease. So what is the solution to this? What can the city and state do?
Well, there's two. Let's talk about the state level. On the state level, we're proposing a caregiver tax credit. The average American who's doing caregiving for a family member is paying nearly 20% of their income out of pocket to pay for that family member's caregiving. And back to that disrupt disparities that we talked about earlier, if you are a Latino, the average you're going to be paying is 44% of your income to help that family member stay at home. That's very burdensome. And we want to keep people staying at home. We want to support family caregivers. They are the largest part of the function of long-term care. Many people don't even think about how they are a family caregiver, but they are. They're helping with minor repairs in their family's homes. They're buying the food for the home. They are helping paying for the rent. They're making improvements to the homes. They're providing transportation. And that's all part of helping people stay in place because you want to do that for your loved one. So we're proposing that to help with this burden and to help people remain at home longer so caregivers don't get burned out, that we get a caregiver tax credit put in where people could get a tax credit for that out-of-pocket costs. And that could really help with that. So that's one of the major things that we're looking for. The other major thing that we're looking for is trying to help keep New York's middle class in the middle class by not having them go underwater in terms of the non-Medicaid services that they need to help them stay in place. So again, what are those things that people are doing to help people stay in place? And then how can services that are already there, that, by the way, are delivered with incredible distinction. I know you have Caryn Resnick coming on later on the call, and both DFTA and SOFA, New York State Office for the Aging, really do an incredible job, but they are sorely underfunded. And we would like to be able to see them extend the quality of those services to people who are in the middle class, who don't get Medicaid, because those are the people who are in jeopardy of slipping down into Medicaid if we don't keep them supported in place.
So, Beth, and I've got only about 30 seconds left and then need to lead into the next guest. Can you just tell our listeners a little more about how they can find out about AARP New York?
Absolutely. As you mentioned before, we have 2.6 million members in New York and 38 million nationwide. And so we would hope that people can come to our website at aarp.org/NY. You can also find us on Facebook at AARP in New York. You can find us on Instagram. We'd love to see you there. And absolutely come find us on Twitter, because if you want to know the latest advocacy and policy and what's important and what needs to be done and what it means to the quality of all of our lives as people age in place, we really hope that you'll come to our AARP Twitter account, too. But first place to go is aarp.org/NY.
Beth Finkel, Director of the New York State Office of AARP, thank you very much for joining me, Jeff Simmons, here on City Talk.
Thank
City
you,
Watch.
Jeff.
Thanks again. So, Beth Finkel and I were just talking about some of the challenges that are being faced by the city and state and the country regarding our nation's aging population. And one thing I've noticed being in my full-time field as a communications consultant for a number of nonprofits is that nonprofits are often picking up the ball, that they are providing a number of the necessary services and the lifelines that a number of seniors need to avoid isolation and to be able to afford to stay in their homes and to access transportation and necessary services. One of the nonprofits who I don't work with, but I have heard very good things about, is called BronxWorks. This is a multi-service organization and a settlement house that was founded in 1972, and it helps people of all ages improve their economic and social well-being. Each year, BronxWorks helps more than 45,000 Bronx residents across 37 locations. Joining me now is Ken Small, who has served as BronxWorks Development Director since 1995. Welcome to City Watch, Ken.
It's good to be back on Citywide. Good to be here. Thank you.
So, Ken, first, give our listeners a brief portrait of BronxWorks and the services you provide.
Well, I think you gave us a good lead-in in terms of talking about BronxWorks being around since 1972, BronxWorks being part of the New York City settlement house system. We're a member of United Neighborhood Houses, which is the umbrella organization for settlements here in the city. And being a member of the settlement house system means that we have a mandate to provide services for people literally from the time they're small children, preschool-age children, right on through the time of their golden years when they're senior citizens. So if you go to any settlement house, BronxWorks included, you'll see a range of services, everything from preschool programming to after-school and summer camp services for elementary school-age children, services for young people who are middle and high school aged, as well as services that target working-age adults and services that target seniors. So as a settlement house, we're part of that spectrum of neighborhood-based services, and we're literally on the ground where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
How many seniors do you work with each year?
In a typical year, BronxWorks will engage somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 to 7,000 seniors, and we do that engagement through a network of senior centers that we operate throughout the borough. We operate 4 senior centers. We also do that through what we call social services that are provided through a naturally occurring retirement community. And for those who aren't familiar with DIFTA language, it's something called a NORC. So we've got in New York City in general, and in Bronx communities in particular, a number of seniors who live in complexes, housing complexes, where essentially they've aged in place. And in the case of BronxWorks, we currently have 2 naturally occurring retirement community service centers. In addition, we provide services for seniors through a minor repair program, a housing assistance program, and we provide services in housing court itself to seniors who are at risk of eviction. And there are some services that we have that are not necessarily senior-specific, but those services end up serving a significant number of older adults. And a good example of that are the BronxWorks walk-in offices, which are spread across several community districts in the Bronx. And in any given year, we will engage somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 seniors through those walk-in offices.
You're mentioning the housing specialists, and you've also got social workers. What are some of the new issues that they're seeing with the individuals who are coming and asking for help?
You know, it was interesting to hear some of the issues that Beth was touching on, and in some cases it's less of new and a more nuanced version of some of the challenges that seniors have historically faced. And I think for a lot of the seniors that we at BronxWorks have encountered, the two biggest issues, and in some, you know, they're really, in a way, what Beth alluded to. One is income. One being in the Bronx, you're oftentimes at an economic disadvantage to begin with. But to be a senior who lives in the Bronx, you're even more economically disadvantaged. And the second item, which I think is very much related to that, is rising housing costs. So at the foundation of many of the challenges that many of our seniors face is, one, their incomes are very low. You're talking about older adults who oftentimes their means of sustenance is Social Security payments, disability payments, or some combination thereof with very small pensions. And when you bundle that together with the fact that, as you know, rents are rising all throughout the city, and rents are rising in the Bronx as well. And what that does is, in effect, it creates a kind of perfect storm that ends up leading to other challenges that seniors have to confront. So if a senior is in a situation where she or he is living in an apartment, their rents are rising, they may look to take someone in as a tenant, and that often creates a set of dynamics that can lead to a number of problems. Sometimes it ends up causing abuse. Sometimes it results in situations where the person who's taken in ends up not paying their portion of the rent. And as a result, the senior, as the primary leaseholder, ends up in court. So I think those are the real two drivers in terms of the challenges that we're seeing. We're also seeing some changing demographics in terms of the seniors that we serve. So if you would have come to the Bronx, say, 40-plus years ago, and gone to a BronxWorks office where we were engaging seniors, you would have probably seen some seniors of European American ancestry, folks from Eastern Europe, folks from parts of the Mediterranean. The demographics of the seniors that we now engage are very different. So you'll see a lot of African American seniors, a lot of Puerto Rican seniors, and increasingly, as some of New York City's major population groups age, we begin to see seniors from those demographic groups. So we're now beginning to see seniors of Dominican ancestry. We're now seeing seniors from West African countries like Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal, because some of those folks have now been in this country for 2 generations. So those are some of the things that we, from a BronxWorks standpoint, are seeing on the ground.
You have been listening to me, Jeff Simmons, here on City Watch, WBAI, New York 99.5 FM, and streaming live at WBAI.org. I am talking with BronxWorks Development Director Ken Small. You have been with BronxWorks since 1995. How has your job changed over those 20, what are we up to now, 25, 26 years? I can't even add right now.
24 years. And we've been talking about seniors, and full disclosure, I am now a senior. So when I started at BronxWorks, I started in my late 30s. I am now in my early 60s. So many of the issues that we're talking about, many of the issues that Beth had been talking about previously, they're issues that resonate with me from a personal standpoint, and they're issues that I think enable me to be a better servant in terms of BronxWorks overall and with regards to our senior population in particular.
We were just talking about housing, and one of the programs that you had launched several years ago, a senior homelessness prevention program. I believe you got city council funding for that. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, the initial impetus for that particular program, the Seniors Homelessness Prevention Program, was actually the Bronx Housing Court, and the person who was the chief administrative judge back in like 2008, 2009, had noticed that there were an increasing number of older adults in Bronx Housing Court who had no legal advisor, no representation, no one to help them navigate the housing court system, the housing court process. And BronxWorks, we have our largest community center is located right next door to Bronx Housing Court, and we've operated a number of eviction prevention programs through the years. So the administrative judge in Bronx Housing Court approached us about creating an eviction prevention program that specifically targeted seniors. We began the program with some foundation funding back in 2011 as a pilot program, and subsequently, thanks to the City Council, Vanessa Gibson, Councilwoman Chin, others in the City Council, we've been able to receive city funding for the program now for about 4 years. And over the course of the last 4 years, we've been able to help about 500 seniors avoid being evicted.
So my co-host, Joel Berg, is going to be very happy I ask about this. One of the other issues that is often faced is food insecurity, and I understand BronxWorks runs a number of food pantries at your locations. Can you talk about that, especially for listeners who are interested in visiting one of the centers?
Yeah, one thing to keep in mind in the context of the food security issue is it's not just food pantries, but it's about other means whereby you can access food. And in the case of the seniors that BronxWorks serves, all 4 of our senior centers provide meals. So you can go to any of the 4 BronxWorks senior centers, and we provide breakfast, we provide lunch. At one of our centers, there are even certain times when we provide dinner. But in the context of the pantries that BronxWorks operates, we have 2 pantries that operate from senior centers that we operate, and those 2 pantries last year combined provided about 6,300 bags of food. Many of those food bags went to seniors, but those food bags also went to community residents who were working age adults and children. And we were able, as a result, to put food on the table for about 10,000 persons throughout our borough.
So this is often described as the most depressing time of the year. It's right after the holidays. There was a piece in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago that I'm going to talk with our next guest about, but I would like to ask you about it as well, about making sure that people are not isolated. What are some of the services? How are you reaching people who may be isolated, who haven't heard about BronxWorks or other nonprofits that are providing services? Where's the obligation? How do we reach people?
One of the things that we've often done at BronxWorks, particularly in the context of seniors, is, I know this is post-Christmas, Kwanzaa, Hanukkah, all the other winter holidays, but during those holidays, prior to those holidays, for seniors who come to our centers, we have a mental health program, and we work with those seniors to see how they are. We ask them if they're aware of other seniors and challenges that they may face. And we have volunteer seniors as well as staff who provide services to older adults who do telephone check-ins, who do follow up with seniors who may be isolated, to see how they're doing, what's going on with them. For folks who don't necessarily have family in the city or in close proximity, we make a concerted effort to get those folks out of their apartments into a senior center or into the programs that we operate at our NORCs, so that they can be engaged, and so that this time of the year and late December, so that it's not a depressing time, but it's actually a time where they feel encouraged, inspired, and energized.
So, Ken, in our final 2 minutes, can you just talk a little about some of the challenges or issues you expect to address this year, and then give our listeners a sense of how they could find out more about BronxWorks?
Yeah, we're going to continue in the context of seniors to be a strong service provider when it comes to addressing housing issues, not only working to prevent evictions, but to help seniors who need help with things like applications for Section 8, other subsidies. We have a minor repair program that's going to continue. And if folks want information regarding BronxWorks and the programs that we have specifically for seniors, they can go to our website, which is www.bronxworks.org, and they can send an email to info@bronxworks.org.
Ken Small, Development Director at BronxWorks. Thank you so much for joining me, Jeff Simmons, here on WBAI this morning.
Thank you, Jeff.
Have a great weekend. So we're going to lead right into our next guest. Our next guest today is Caryn Resnick. She is the City Department for the Aging's Acting Commissioner. DFDA is what I'll be referring to it as, partners with hundreds of community-based organizations that provide services through senior centers, naturally occurring retirement communities, case management, and home care agencies, home-delivered meal programs, a lot of services you may have heard about talked about today, mental health and friendly visiting programs, and much more in each borough. DFDA is, in fact, the largest area agency on aging in the country. Now, Caryn Resnick has been serving as DFDA's acting commissioner, and she's been with the agency since 2002. Previously, she served as chief of staff and currently also as Deputy Commissioner of External Affairs. She's a nationally recognized advocate for seniors, serving as a delegate to the 1995 White House Conference on Aging, as well as an advisor to the New York State Assembly Committee on Aging. Welcome to City Watch.
Thank you.
Happy
to be here this morning.
Thank you for joining me today. Earlier, we had Beth Finkel from AARP on, and she said that you are doing DFDA is doing an incredible job given the budget, but she had some kind words for the work that you are doing. Can you talk a little about your report, Age Friendly NYC, New Commitments for a City for All Ages? Because that had noted that in less than a quarter century, 1 in 5 New Yorkers are going to be at least 60 years old. Tell me a little about what DFDA is doing to address these new needs.
Thank you. The Age Friendly NYC report comes out of the World Health Organization Global Cities Initiative, and we're very proud that New York City was really the first to be designated as an age-friendly city. And in partnership with the City Council and with the New York Academy of Medicine, we've worked over the years since 2009 to come up with a set of initiatives that will help New York City be the most age-friendly place to grow older. And some of those initiatives are very small, things you wouldn't think of, like getting benches put on sidewalks so people have an opportunity to rest as they shop or walk up and down the streets of New York City, extending and making swimming hours in parks and recreation exclusively for older adults, because we heard in neighborhoods they were afraid to go to the pools because of all the kids splashing around. So this was really going neighborhood by neighborhood, talking to seniors, having people do walkability studies, and coming up with some very local ways of making the streets and the city more age-friendly.
So how do we keep the city affordable and livable for an aging population?
So, of course, that's one of the great challenges as we're looking toward having almost 1 in 5 New Yorkers being an older adult in the near future. Livability and affordability are one of the biggest issues. And so I know you've heard from my colleagues that housing is one of the largest issues that face affordable housing. And, of course, the Mayor's Housing New York plan, building over 300,000 units of affordable homes by 2026, is a huge piece of that. And with our partners, we've advocated for seniors and senior housing to be developed. And so there is a commitment for 30,000 of those units to be constructed. We continue to work with all of our partners to make sure that there are also social services that go along with that. Of course, having a place to live is important, but we know that having the other components that help an older person age in place are also important. A program I would love to remind all the listeners about is the SCREE, the Senior Citizen Rent Increase Exemption Program, which, believe it or not, is underutilized and can really help an older adult remain in their home. If they're living in rent-stabilized or rent-controlled housing and you have income under $58,000, you can have your rent frozen. And, I mean, it is an amazing benefit, and we are working with all of our community partners to try and get every single older adult who is eligible to enroll in these programs. So that's another way that we can help seniors age in place. The SNAP, the food stamps program, is also underutilized by older adults. And these are the very types of programs and benefits that can really provide the extra $10, $15 a month that can help somebody make ends meet. So we're constantly trying to get the word out about benefits and entitlements.
I was just going to ask, like, where do you think the disconnect is? Because these seem to be very valuable programs.
They are very valuable, and there's, a whole number of reasons, and we've tried a whole variety of different marketing strategies. Some, of course, are immigration status, and there are many, many older adults in New York, and they fear that if they apply for any kind of government benefits, it might affect their status. That is not the case. So we're trying to dispel those myths. Food stamps has always had some stigma attached. So I think we have a lot of proud people that feel like they don't deserve or are afraid to actually apply for government programs.
What's been interesting this morning is the variety of topics that come up. We've talked about housing. I talked about, last guest as well, about food insecurity. There's also transportation issues. What are some of the challenges in being able to meet the needs of an aging population, given our transportation system?
So I like to say that New York City is one of the greatest places to retire, and many people don't think about transportation. And even though we have some crisis with our transportation programs, we really have more available than if you're, growing old in a rural county and you have to drive and you can't do that any longer. You truly become isolated. So we do have public transportation, of course, and half fare for older adults, but we're trying to pilot some new initiatives. The department does fund senior transportation, where you can get a ride to and from your home to your senior center or to medical appointments. We have that available in every borough. Again, many seniors don't know this is available to them, so we're happy to be on your show today to get the word out. And we're piloting a new demonstration for an on-demand 24/7 car service program that would be done through an app. We're trying to use technology. More and more people over 60, of course, the baby boomers, are using their iPhones and able to use apps. And so we're piloting an on-demand program in a couple of communities that are really transportation deserts. And we want to see if we can expand this over time.
When did that pilot? That's interesting. I had not heard of that.
We are just starting it, and it was through a federal transportation grant, and it's just getting off the ground right now in this new year.
And you said it's in some of the communities that might be, transportation?
Yes, in Queens and in Brooklyn. So we're piloting in particular community districts where access to public transportation is very difficult.
So today, in talking about housing, transportation, food insecurity, there's also healthcare needs. What does DFTA offer as far as healthcare?
So really the goal of our agency and our services are to allow people to grow old in their communities and really to avoid institutionalization. So we have many programs for people to come to our senior centers where we're offering more and more health prevention programming. So you can come and take Tai Chi classes, evidence-based programming that help people prevent falls. I don't know if any of my colleagues talked about the issue of falls and falls prevention impacts older adults and leading cause of death, actually. Chronic disease self-management for people who have diabetes. And so we're offering more and more health prevention programming in our senior centers. And again, more programming for people who are homebound through our home-delivered meals program, which provides nutrition for people who may be nutritionally at risk, and a case manager who comes in and does an assessment for a homebound person and then gets them hooked up if they don't have a primary care physician. So we're doing everything we can to provide access to health care for people living in our neighborhoods.
So earlier I had talked with Beth Finkel about caregivers, and the city has about 1.3 million individuals who are unpaid caregivers, if I have that number right.
That's correct.
How does DFTA connect with them, and what are you doing? Because what I have read as far as research is that there's going to be a much greater demand. So how are we preparing for the next generation of caregivers?
So caregiving it's really an enormous issue. Most people don't even recognize that they are a caregiver. So we recently undertook a public service campaign. The theme was, they depend on you, you can depend on us. And we have a caregiver support center at the department, and we fund 10 community-based organizations around the city of New York who can provide caregiver services, which include things like respite care, if you need to get home care or place your loved one in a social day program for the day so that the caregiver can get a break and go out and meet their own basic needs. Counseling and support. People like myself, the baby boomer generation, are often caring for older adults, working a full-time job, raising children. So that whole sandwich generation is really impacted. And we were extremely pleased to get an additional $4 million in last year's executive budget so that we could expand those respite and supplemental services to caregivers in the city.
So what are some of the investments that the city is making to address the mental health needs of seniors? So
through the city's Thrive New York City initiative, the department was able to get about $1.5 million to begin providing geriatric mental health services on site in our senior centers. We've learned, of course, everybody knows that there is stigma attached, and particularly for older adults who didn't grow up, going to therapy, that having access to services where they are is really critical. And so we're now in 25 senior centers with clinically trained mental health workers who can provide services on site. We're hoping we're going to be able to expand this because it's proven to be extremely successful. And we launched a friendly visiting program, which is a light touch kind of mental health counseling of just bringing somebody in to visit with an isolated homebound senior. We have all kinds of anecdotes about wonderful friendships that have come out of that. And if they recognize as a friendly visitor that somebody is suffering from anxiety or depression, they can make that referral to our social workers and our case management agencies.
So, LGBT older adults are some of the most invisible and at-risk populations in the country, often isolated and disconnected from services. What are some of the services and resources that DFTA provides to meet their needs?
So the Department for the Aging actually funded the first LGBT senior center in the nation, and our partner is SAGE. And we have been able to work with them over the years to expand their funding so that we now have at least one Department for the Aging funded LGBT center in each borough. SAGE has been able to secure funding, actually, to build 2 senior housing developments that will be one of the first ever in the nation for LGBT seniors to have affordable housing and a senior center on site. And those are being built Ingersoll in Fort Greene and Crotona in the Bronx. So those are going to be coming online in the next year, and it's very exciting. And there are other partners throughout the city. Griot Circle, Queens Community House also has an LGBT center, and they are thriving and growing.
And with Ken Small a few moments ago, I talked about a Wall Street Journal article that had appeared in December that DFTA was part of in talking about isolation this time of year. Can you just talk briefly, because we've got about 2 minutes left, a little about what DFTA has done to be able to reach out to people this time of year?
Again, through our Volunteer Resource Center, we try and get friendly visitors to go in home to visit with socially isolated seniors. Our senior centers are a wonderful place to come and enjoy holiday celebrations. So we try and get people to come in and have lunch and socialization with other senior members. And we are talking about embarking on a campaign about the issue of social isolation, just to get people to begin to recognize that there are many people that have nobody else in their lives, and we want to encourage older New Yorkers to reach out. Simply saying good morning or hello is a wonderful way to brighten somebody's day. We're going to launch a massive campaign to get all New Yorkers to reach out to their elderly neighbors.
And in the final 15 seconds, can you tell me how people can learn more about you and your office?
Absolutely. You can reach us by going to www.nyc/gov. You can call 311 and get connected to any of our resources and services.
Caryn Resnick, DFTA's acting commissioner, thank you for joining me here on WBAI 99.5 FM this morning.
Thank you, Jeff.
So another episode of City Watch is coming to a close. I'd like to thank our guests today, Caryn Resnick from the City Department of for the Aging, Beth Finkel of AARP New York, and Ken Small of BronxWorks. Also thanks to our engineer, Sean Rhodes, for another great performance of the boards, who smiles at me when I kind of sit back away from the microphone, which is my resolution for this year, not to do that. And thank you especially to our listeners for supporting the show. If you missed any part of it, just go to our website at WBAI.org and click on Archives and then City Watch. The show will be up and ready online in about 10 minutes and stay up for 90 days. That's it for today. Stay tuned for the next program.